Strength and Things That Remain podcast. We're glad you're here today. We've been on hiatus for a little while. Not made one. Todd's been in Ireland and England and
Scotland,
not Ireland.
Not Ireland.
Well, it's hard to keep up with you because you jet set a lot.
Yeah,
so it's hard to keep
England,
up with you.
Scotland. Yeah.
But we're back. Hopefully this winter, this fall and winter, we'll be making these a little more regular and you can be tuning in. And we've got a fantastic one to start with. We've got Cassie Burleson with us and Cassie York, so two Cassies. And we probably one time last year, we did a podcast on drug abuse and had Ryan Hayes, who's a drug officer for the North Wilkesboro PD. And it was a very much watched. But I'll tell you another one we did. I hadn't even thought about it was with Preacher Keith Watkins.
Yeah,
he's got a ministry at his church where he reaches out to. A matter of fact, the church is in Asheville, and some of those drug rehab programs require so much time. Anyway, coming to his recovery program, which is basically just church, counts toward their hours that they have to put in. And so he has a lot of drug addicts that come to his church trying to get those hours in. But anyway, so we've done a couple along this line, and heard y'all's stories through Sheriff Shane Hilliard. Shane was on our last podcast, and I'd heard about both your stories some already through working in law enforcement. I just heard some of the stories. And he called me, I guess, the day after you spoke at Mountain Heritage High School. So they did a narcotics awareness.
Overdose
awareness at Mountain Heritage for the kids there, and you guys spoke there. Yep. So the next day, the sheriff calls me and he's like, "You've got to get these girls and interview them on podcast." And because your story is the same story of millions of others, right up until the point where you get out of it. That part's I'm not saying unique, but it don't happen a lot.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to have you on and talk to you guys about drug addiction, get your stories, how you got out of how did you get out of that world, and like we were talking before the podcast, maybe give some hope to someone who's watching that has a child that's involved in this. It's so prevalent. Maybe give a word of warning to some kids or even adults that they would stay away from drug abuse, and then maybe a word of hope for those who are already in it about that there is a way out. It doesn't have to end their lives. It can be a way out. So Cassie, I'm going to scoot the mic towards you, and we're going to start with your story there a little bit. You already told it to me and Todd, but give us your story again. Tell us about who you are and how things went in your life.
Okay, thanks. I might need you to redirect me if I.
That's fine.
Okay. My name's Cassie Burleson. I'm originally from Yancey County. Lived in Bakersville for many years. Moved over there in the 2nd grade. Grew up in a good house with good people. I was not the kid that we look around sometimes and we say, that kid didn't have a chance. That was not me. I lived in a good home. We didn't go to church, but I went with my friends. My mom and dad were married to each other. They took care of us. I played ball. I lived in the kind of family that we see every single day. Like I said, I played basketball. I had tons of friends. I was connected to all of the things going on at school. My friends took me to church. I was saved at Coke Creek Baptist Church sometime when I was about 10 or 11. And, I lived a good life. And then it was time to go to high school. And, I had been doing all these extracurricular activities for fun. But when you go to high school, it gets serious.
Right.
They want you to run miles and show up at like 4 o'clock I didn't even like playing basketball. I was like, there's no way. And so you mentioned saying something to people who might, warning children, warning parents.
Right.
When I lost that connection, that's when my life changed. When I stopped playing ball, when I stopped running track, when I stopped hanging out with my friends that did these positive activities, and I lost that connection, that is when my life derailed. It was not necessarily the first substance I ever put in my body, but when I lost that, I was bored.
Right.
I was no longer connected to people who were doing positive things, and I had a whole lot of time and a whole lot of energy, and I just started having fun.
Right.
By the time I was 19, I was completely addicted to opioids, first prescribed by a doctor, told to take them, was raised to do what I was told. And that's not an excuse. That's just how it started.
You got hurt, or why
Actually,
was the prescription?
I was pregnant. I was 18 years old and pregnant, and my OB doctor in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, gave me 90 Loratabs. This is the opioid crisis that we speak of now.
Right.
And again, I'm not blaming him.
Right.
I'm just telling you it was the perfect storm.
So you told us earlier that I think you started when you were in high school. You started drinking. How old was you when you started?
I have no idea.
But you early in high school.
Absolutely.
Early in high school?
Probably freshman year.
Right. Okay.
When I quit doing the other things.
And then from drinking, you started smoking marijuana.
Yeah.
So you kind of had already started going down a path that was not the wrong path, I guess you could say.
Well, it was definitely a risky path, for sure. It left a lot of room, just drinking, period, for me, means I'm not going to make good decisions.
Yeah.
I can't drink.
Now, we were talking before, and we'll get to your story in just a moment, but all of our stories began with alcohol. A lot of people think alcohol is okay, but a lot of times, to me, it gives you courage to take the next step. So anyway, you started opioids when you were 18?
Yes.
19?
I was 18. I was pregnant with my son. Yes. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it did take all the pain away. The pain of being 18 in a relationship that was horrible. The pain of, knowing that I screwed all the other things up.
Right.
And here I sit because I knew better. I knew how I was supposed to live, and I wasn't doing it. Fast forward through the years, that just started it. So y'all redirect me however you want. But in that time...
So your child was born. Did you continue the opioid use?
Oh, yes, and methamphetamine.
So when did you start methamphetamine after the birth of your first child or while you were...
No, not while I was pregnant. After... He was about a year old, but I'm not certain. A lot of those years are blurry.
Somebody turned you on to that? Somebody offer you that? Or do you just, the opioids wasn't doing it any longer and you had to try to find something different?
No, it was all about a party. It was all about having fun. I do remember now that you said that. Somebody just handed diet pills, I think was the first thing. Like, oh, well, this is way better than that.
Right.
And
so it just escalated and escalated.
Oh,
So tell us a little bit about how it sucked you in, that lifestyle.
Oh, mercy. It was so much fun, just like the season of fun.
Right.
And then when that's over, it's complete torment. But yeah, just having fun. It was so much fun. And if the consequences became, uncomfortable, I just did more drugs.
Right.
Because that's what I did.
Right.
So yeah, it did. It just rolled into, that's just how every day.
So let's fast forward a little bit. I know because you told us you pretty much your drug addiction, what it turned into having fun, turned into a severe addiction.
Oh, yes. It turned into torment.
Right. And the season, there's pleasure in sin for a season, but the season's out. And just tell us about when things begin to unravel, how you begin to lose things you were talking about previously.
I can tell you the day that I realized that I had crossed over to a point that there was no going back. I was coming by Ingalls and Spruce Pond, and I had no pain pills. And if you know anything about that, you get incredibly physically ill if you don't have them. Well, I needed to go home because my stepson had homework. But when I got to that red light, I went straight on through it because I couldn't go home until I found pills. And at that moment, I remember thinking, this choice I'm making this is where I am. Mm-hmm. This is who I am now.
Right.
So I forgot what your question was, but I remember.
So how far did that take you? You lost. What did you begin to lose?
The first thing I lost was I had DSS involvement, and then I got arrested. Years and years and years of methadone clinics and doctors and court dates and having no power and no water and no food, being physically ill.
So basically you lost everything.
I lost everything.
I know you told us you lost your children.
I lost my children, my husband, my home, my car, and everything.
Let's talk about that just a little bit about losing. You know, we were talking about previously about losing when you lost your children.
Yeah.
A lot of times people think that will wake somebody up, but it didn't wake you up.
Oh, mercy. By the time that my children were taken, I was past the point of being able to make decisions. I was already so hurt and so numb and so disgusted with myself and so very addicted that when that happened, it gave up. I mean, that just took every single reason I had for living away. So yeah.
So instead of it being a wake-up call for you, it just plunged you deeper in. You had to try to come up with something to get it.
I knew I couldn't do it. I knew I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
The shape I was in. And they had just, I'd rather have been dead.
Right.
So whenever you'd rather die than be alive in your life,
right.
In that place,
right.
That's exactly how I felt.
So fast forward for us, Cassie. Mm-hmm. Eventually you end up with some warrants.
Oh, mercy. Yeah, I had something like 47 felony warrants.
Right.
Yeah, out of Mitchell County. I was on a $50,000 bond out of Mitchell County and 100 in Yancey County.
Right.
Yeah, the police were looking for me.
Right.
I had nowhere to go. Nobody wanted me anywhere.
Right.
So you ended up in prison after how many years of addiction?
Oh my goodness, I would say from the time I was 18 until probably 12 years. That's not use, but that's hard addiction.
Hard addiction for 12 years.
Yeah.
So what was rock bottom? Was it the prison?
Oh, no. No, sir. Rock bottom was when I had nowhere to go and I was an IV drug user and my family couldn't even get around me because I would take everything they had. Mm-hmm. My children called me over and over and over, but I didn't answer the phone. I only had a phone so Mama could find me if I never showed up again. Because it had one of those things where she could have them pinpoint where I was.
Right.
That was rock bottom.
Right.
Prison is where I was able to rest and my mind and body to start healing, and I could hear what the Lord had to say to me. Right. That's what prison was. People think that prison is the worst.
Right.
Mm-hmm. No. Well, I've seen for a lot of people it saves their life.
Oh, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Lord saved my life, but prison put me still enough that I could hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it helped me get well enough physically to, it's hard to make decisions. Cassie says lost people act like lost people.
Yep.
There you are. Lost people act like lost people. And it's hard to make decisions based on what we consider rational or normal when nothing in your brain or your life is rational.
So you got in prison and it gave you an opportunity to get off the drugs. You started getting your mind clear. You started getting better. Mm-hmm. And then the Lord started working in your life there in prison. Tell us about that transition.
Well, he started in Yancey County Jail in the second cell over in that first block there. When I prayed before I was going to prison for the Lord to give me peace to accept, and he answered me. He answered me in Yancey County. He spoke to me.
Right.
Okay. People say not audibly. It feels pretty loud inside of me.
Yeah.
I always think, well,
Yeah.
but yes, he did. And then I had been in custody in Raleigh for, I don't know, a couple months, and I walked by, maybe not even that long, I walked by a mirror, and I glanced up, and I didn't recognize myself.
Right.
And there were no mirrors in my home. I did not like to see what was looking back at me. Okay.
Right.
And he told me, this is your chance. I'm giving you this.
Right.
You probably won't get another one.
Yeah.
So he did. He started before I got there, though. And I just kept talking to him. It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
People complicate it. It's as simple as that. I started asking him to help me with the tiniest of things.
Right.
Like to figure out how to do things and navigate. And I went to they have Dark Cherry in Raleigh Central, or they did. I don't know if they still do. But I was mandated to that. And I went there, and no, I didn't want to go to rehab. And yes, I thought I was a lost cause, but the Lord put me there so that I could learn one very important thing about integrity. I say that a lot. People get what they go looking for.
Right.
Wherever you are. So yes, he did. He worked on me the whole time I was there. I started reading the Word, and I read it through.
Right.
But the biggest relationship I had was the conversation, the prayer that I had.
Right. So, how long did you stay in prison?
26 months.
That's and then when you got out, where did you go?
Yeah, my mom picked me up. She had agreed to let me sleep. My daughter was living with her. Thank you, Jesus. She agreed to let me sleep in the back bedroom in Jordan's floor on a piece of foam. And you know how you hear people talk about they got out of prison. My mom was so happy. My mom was not so happy.
Right.
Okay. She said, I'll try to get over there before lunch, but I've got a lot to do this morning.
Right.
I was happy that she would even come.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So she picked me up and I went there.
You know, we had a guy on the podcast here that he runs a ministry that what they do is they take in people that are getting out of prison that have nowhere to go.
Reentry.
He's got a house for them. And you know, he finds them jobs. They've got like a thrift store that they work in, and he's a pastor of a church. It's in Rutherford County. Pastor of a church down there. But until we had him on the podcast, it hadn't ever really dawned on me what a problem it is for people getting out of prison that have nowhere to go. Yeah.
It's crucial. It is so important. I'm so glad you told me that, because now I will look him up.
Yeah. It's called Pilgrim's
Pathway
House of Refuge or something like that.
Have you heard of this?
Well, I got some information. I can give you some information on it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people burn bridges. They've disappointed their family so many times that people are just,
well,
you know.
And sometimes that's what people need too.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that as a person who has substance use disorder. Seriously, if I had not had a safe place to go back to, that I had to, I don't want to say dig myself out, because that's not necessary. The Lord drugged me out of that, okay, when I asked him to. But I had a safe, drug-free place to go. I did not have a place where they were like, oh, yes, we've missed you, we loved you, here's you a cell phone and a car, and let me give you some money and let me buy you some new clothes because we missed you so bad.
Right.
They were like, yes, you can sleep here, and we'll see what happens.
Right.
Up to you.
You think that was better for you?
Oh, my goodness. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we have to be humble, and I have to be humble.
So for a mom that's out there watching this, and I may be getting ahead of ourselves, but it's best. Would you say tough love? Is that what's? Tell us what's best there.
Okay, in my opinion, and of course, I am not the expert. I don't call that tough love. I call that the purest of love.
Right.
Because if we don't hold people accountable, if we don't let them learn how to survive on their own. I'm not saying not walk alongside people.
Right.
But if I hadn't learned how to figure it out, to survive on my own, then, because mom and dad's not going to always be here.
Right.
Do you
It
think
also doesn't teach you to work or appreciate anything.
Right.
was they people in your life that enabled your drug addiction?
Absolutely. Anybody that I could manipulate. And I was good at it. That's why I stayed so sick for so long.
That's a good point, because one thing that I have heard a lot of users say that I've talked to from the law enforcement end is that you can tell they're good at manipulating the situation and manipulating people.
Yeah.
To get high. I mean, that's their ultimate goal. So, part of me thinks that sometimes parents are a little naive about being manipulated. Do you think it's that they just don't want to believe that it's happening?
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you have to be able to go to sleep at night and think you've done everything that you can.
Right.
And if you think about the things that are too hard to think about.
Right.
And also, there comes a point that, manipulate to get high. There comes a point when you manipulate to be able to physically function.
Right.
And it changes the dynamic. It's no longer getting high.
It's just trying to stay alive. It's
Yeah.
surviving.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's what it feels like.
So let's finish up.
Sure.
Yeah, and then we're going to get your story, and then we're going to get some, and we may bust this up into 2 podcasts. That'll be okay.
Okay.
But so you get out of prison, you're sleeping on the floor at your mom's.
And I'm thankful to be.
Yeah. And you said just a minute ago you had to dig yourself out.
Well-
Tell us how that starts happening.
Well, people don't really think about this sometimes, but I was an active youth from the time I was 18 till I was 30. I'd never gotten my driver's license sober.
How about that?
I had never turned the lights on anywhere, had power hooked up. I had never bought a car. If I had, it wasn't sober, and it wasn't the way that you buy a
You
car.
basically did not know how
I
to
had no
function
idea how
or
to
do
figure out
operate any
No.
way without drugs.
No, I didn't. And so learning all those things, which also taught me to pray a lot,
Right.
because things that you guys take for granted, having never lived that way, I asked the Lord to walk with me every step.
Right.
I'm talking about walking in the driver's license office.
Right.
I'm talking about putting in a job application when you have 38 felony convictions.
Right. Yeah, that's hard to explain.
Yeah. And you'd really rather, let them get to know you before they see that part.
Right.
Anyway, but the Lord make a way.
Right.
He made a way.
Right.
So yes, I did do the work,
Right.
but I also asked for help every single thing. I had never been married sober. I had never been a parent sober. There was all the things that I had to learn how to do.
Right. Right.
And people expected me to be 30 years old and know that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So how many years are we sober and clean now?
I have been sober and clean, substance free since July 28th of 2010. So 12 years.
Good for you.
Right? I'm back to that 12 in use, and now I'm even. Okay.
Yeah.
By
Right.
next year, yeah, I'm expecting big things for next year.
Yeah.
Right. Excellent. And we're going to talk here in just a minute. I want to get the other Cassie's story in, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what you guys are doing for a living now and how you're helping people with substance abuse problems. And we're going to talk about some advice, and all that. We'll get that in the next part of the podcast. But for right now, I'm going to scoot this in your direction.
Okay.
And you're Cassie York.
Yes.
So tell us your story.
Okay, so I am a Mitchell County native, born and raised. I've lived there all my life. I don't know, not anything noteworthy about myself. Like growing up, I was just, I was well liked. I will say that. I've always been well liked by people. I just didn't like myself.
Right.
We talked earlier, my mom and my biological father were not married, and this was a time when that was a big, shame. a source of shame. I mean, it just happened, right? It was just one of those things. And he chose not to be a part of my life at that time. He actively stayed away, right? And I was left with the feeling that there was something wrong with me. There had to have been something wrong with me if my parent didn't want me.
Right.
You know, I couldn't be worth very much. So, you know, growing up, I grew up with my mom and my stepdad. She didn't get married. And he loved me. You know, he had issues, mental health issues, but loved me. They both, you know, they both loved me.
Right.
But they had their own stuff, you know. My mom was, you know, depressed and anxious, and he's, you know, has bipolar disorder. I mean, and, you know, I remember, and he has obsessive compulsive disorder too, but I remember, like when he would have to go get ready to go to work, he would be in the bathroom. It was like for 2 hours. He would wash the change out of his pocket.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah.
Okay. Brush his teeth to the point that the dentist told him he's going to have to stop.
Yeah.
Like, because he's brushing so much,
Right.
you know, and it was just very consuming. And, you know, I had a lot of, like I said, I had a lot of social acceptance by people, actually. I just didn't accept myself.
Right.
And I always just had that inside. And it's like if you have that low self-esteem, you hide it. Because it's like bringing it out. You don't want anybody else to join in and confirm. Oh, yeah, there is something wrong with you.
Right.
So I was, you know, a pretty good student. You know, I love to learn. I will say that. And I wasn't raised in church either. And I feel like that was a missing piece. But I would go with family to church sometimes. My grandmother, my grandparents, my dad's, my biological father's parents were a part of my life. Which kind of, you know, was great, and also highlighted the fact that he actively chose to not come around. You know? But they prayed. I mean, they would pray. I remember, you know, being with them, and this, you know, they had this room in the house they called the fire room. It's where their wood stove was, and they would pray. And I was little, and I was like, are we ever going to stop praying?
Yeah.
You know? But I feel like those prayers were very fruitful. They prayed for me a lot. And then in high school, you know, my whole thoughts about, you know, I was always going to go to school. I was always going to go to college.
Right.
That had been instilled in me forever, my whole life. But I had a lot of fear, you know, because I had a lot of brokenness inside, you know. Did not have faith in myself.
Right.
But everyone else seemed to think, oh, yeah, you know, you can do this or whatever. But I just didn't really feel like I could, and I didn't feel like I could talk about it. So I hid it. I hid it inside, and I just went through the motions. And the closer it got to graduation, senior year, the more fearful I became. Fear of failure, you know, just not knowing. And about the same time, I'd like went to a party one night and realized that my people I knew from school and my friends drank, you know, and no one at my house drank or used drugs.
Right.
And, you know, I drank too, even though Mom had warned me forever, for my whole life, that people in our family couldn't handle drugs or alcohol.
Right.
I drank because my friends were drinking.
Right.
And I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to feel accepted in my heart.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah. It's hard to stand out there on that ledge, you know, if you're not okay with yourself.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because really your drinking started because you wanted to fit in. Mm-hmm. Yours, you just wanted to have fun.
Yep.
And how different reasons led to the same thing, you know.
Yep.
The same
Yeah.
instruction.
So you started drinking in high school,
And I found a
graduated.
way to feel okay inside my own skin for the first time.
Right.
So how much was you drinking in high school?
I started out drinking on the weekends, and honestly, this was it within like, I don't know, 2 to 3 months of graduation. I mean, it was pretty quickly. I mean, and then it escalated
You
because I
graduated?
went through the summer, partied through the summer, drinking periodically at least, and then went to Western, and drank more because no one was there to keep me from it.
So you went to Western Carolina University. Excuse me, just wait just a little bit for me. You can lean back out.
Sorry.
You're fine. You went to Western Carolina University. What were you going to school for?
A counselor.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always wanted to be a counselor ever since I was in middle school.
Right.
So you was drinking heavier. So when did drugs come on the scene?
I actually came home for a weekend, and a friend of mine was smoking pot. We were in the car, and she's like, "And you're going to find out that I smoke pot." I was like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
And I smoked pot with her. And honestly, that first, it didn't seem like it was that big a deal. But I bought more pot, I guess maybe to see what it's about, And then eventually I got it. Okay. And I smoke pot all the time. I smoke pot every day. Because again, I felt uncomfortable in my own skin and always had, And that I was more of an escape person. I've always been that person. Like, I'm going to run from this. I'm going to run from myself. Yeah. And that helped me, escape myself.
It's so interesting. So many drug addicts that I've talked to, they all have one thing in common: alcohol, pot, something harder. It's like the steps of getting involved in it. So from pot, what was your next drug of choice?
Meth. Meth was always my drug of choice. The first time I ever smoked meth, I didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't even know what it was.
Right.
Okay. Right. I'd never seen it before, and I couldn't tell you the name of it then. Right. I had no idea and didn't ask.
Right.
Because other people were doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody just offered it to you.
Yeah. Offered it to me and said, "Here, take you a hit of this, so you'll be all right." And then someone across the table went.
Yeah.
And I did, and I was hooked on it the first time I ever smoked it.
Right. And I think that's pretty typical with meth. It hooks people fast.
Very fast.
And so tell us about how that progressed. What happened in life for you once you started using meth?
Once I started using meth, I don't know, just like one day I just didn't go back home. I didn't go home. I was gone for a while, days to weeks. I'm not sure exactly the lapse of time, but my parents got really worried. A year prior to that, my cousin had been found in a motel in Asheville. She was dead. So that kind of, made them more aware and more afraid when I didn't come home. So they involved law enforcement. They came and arrested me for the first time for unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. It was my car, but they could use that as a way to bring me back, because they were scared for my life. I'd never done anything like that before, and so I was, I complied. I was sentenced to probation. I was, part of my sentence was to go to rehab. I did those things. I completed my probation. During that time while I was on probation, I got pregnant with my son. I had him.
Stayed clean during that time.
Yeah, stay clean. So you had a period of time there where you kind of.
Yep.
So tell us about how all that changed.
Okay, so my son's dad and my daughter's dad are two different people, right? Got pregnant with my son, had my son. I guess he was maybe, about 6 months old. Me and his dad split up. And stayed, single for a little while, and then started seeing someone else, which is actually my daughter's dad. But during that time, I did, when after my son was born and stuff, I would drink occasionally, not not anything really significant, and smoke some pot occasionally.
Right.
But was mostly sober during this time. But that also left that window open.
Yeah.
Right? And started seeing somebody who I knew had a significant history because I knew him before, right? And that turned into, I got pregnant again. And my mom was like, "You really need to get married."
Right.
You know, this is not okay.
Right.
Mom didn't know, though.
Right.
She didn't know because I didn't tell her.
Right.
You know, that by this time he had confessed to me that he was buying several $100s worth of pills a day.
Right.
You know, and he was also selling meth. Okay, you sell that meth. Meth was not his jam. He would use it, but he had a significant opiate problem.
Beautiful.
Yeah, he was hooked on oxys big time. Yep. And it's like kind of like one of those things where it's like if you don't know, you don't know. It's like you know, I mean, what meth he was using, I couldn't tell because he was using so many pills.
Right.
But anyway, then, you know, I was pregnant. I had her, and then I guess she was about 2. I started using pills too.
Right.
You know, because I couldn't stay in that relationship anymore the way it was.
Did something trigger that, or did you just kind of gave in, or is it just was? I mean, because she's 2 years after she was born before you, and he's using it, right?
Yeah.
And you're not. Was it just being around it all the time? Just, hey, it's there. Or was it?
It was waiting for him to die every single day. I mean, it was scary.
Right.
Like, I'm serious. Like, I was about 8 months pregnant. I was standing beside the road after being called where he'd hit a tree head on about 55 mile an hour without even braking because he was knotted out of the wheel. I mean, and this was like every night I would like check his breath and make sure he was breathing. I mean, he was so. By this time, I knew how unwell he was. He wouldn't come home before 9 o'clock every night, and I was fearful that he would not live to see the next day. And that kind of does something to you.
Right. Now, somebody watching that's never been involved in this world is going to think right there, well, why couldn't she see what it was doing to him and make her run away from it rather than run to it? Tell us about the thought process there.
Well, I feel like, you know, especially where my dad wasn't part of my life, wanting that male approval, that, you know, love, always searching for that, you know. And I remember, you know, before with the previous guy, I mean, who was unable to give in a relationship or, you know.
Right.
But feeling like, and I don't even know if this thought was very clear, but that feeling of, is if someone else will love me, I'll be okay.
Right.
Like if I can get a guy to love me, it'll like check that box and I'll be okay.
Right. Yeah.
Now with my husband, this one, you know, he loved me,
right,
but he was so sick
right,
that it was, you know,
right,
and I really do believe that he did, but.
right.
He was so unwell that it could, I mean, it kind of like canceled it out.
So what was it that made you start using with him?
Well, I mean, I think it was just like, how can I survive in this?
Right.
Either I'm going to have to leave or I'm going to have to start doing it too.
Yeah.
Then I won't, well, it's like, then I won't be so mad at him.
Right.
And if you leave,
You know?
you'll be alone.
Yeah, well, and it's like, yeah.
You
I
felt
mean,
like he was trapped.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
I loved him.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
So, you know.
So you started using opiates with him.
Mm-hmm. Oxys.
And then that started getting out of hand.
Fast. Within a month, I knew I was in bad shape.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I'd used meth in the past, and I loved meth. I mean, I did. But oxys was a whole nother ball game. Like, within a month, and I remember pulling up in the Walmart parking lot, clear as day, still today, remembering, what have I done to myself?
Right.
Because I didn't have a pill, I felt horrible.
Right. Right.
And, you know, for me, meth had never done that for me. I mean,
Right.
like, you could sleep it off and move on.
Right.
But oxys was not like that.
Right. So DSS gets involved.
Okay, so he and I split up, because that's what drugs do, right?
Right.
I mean, we ended up splitting up, and I went to go live, me and the kids went to go live in a trailer in Bakersville. And, because we'd been living on their own. Well, you know, with me comes my substance use, you know.
Right.
But there was a lot of turbulence between the two of us, you know, a lot of big feelings, a lot of pain, you know, a lot of anger. And I'd started seeing somebody else, and it just was not peaceful. It was not a peaceful transition. And in the course of all of that, DSS was called numerous times.
Right.
Okay, but then it finally, you know, came to, all the while I'm getting sicker, all the while that they finally came to the house one day when my kids were at school and said they won't be coming back.
Right.
you know.
Talk about that. We talked about that a little bit before, how that when that happened, when you lost your kids, it didn't wake you up. But both y'all said this, it didn't wake you up.
Well, you know, I cried very little because I couldn't feel anything. And it's, you know, it's hard to change when you can't feel anything.
Yeah.
You can use drugs and this hope, or alcohol, either one, to numb out all those negative feelings that we don't want to feel. But in that, you also numb out the positive, you know,
Right.
and then you just can't feel anything.
Right.
But I went up to DSS. I'll never forget it. They laid a case plan out on the table for me to figure that out, do those things. I mean, and by this time, I had sold my car. I didn't have any transportation. My mom was pretty done with me at this point, because I'd let it get to the point that they would take my children away.
Right.
And I don't blame her. You know, that was not who she raised me to be.
Right.
It was just like so daunting, so overwhelming. And I was so sick. I mean, on substances and stuff by that point. I was like, I didn't know. I mean, I used all the time. It wasn't like I just would use at night or use on the weekends. I used all the time,
Right.
preferably. So that was overwhelming. That kind of pushed, and there was nobody to help me. I'd already pushed my family away.
Right.
That just pushed me kind of over the limit.
Right.
And at some point in there, you know, I started going to church with my parents, who had started going to church because they didn't know how to, you know, they were desperate. And they started church because they were desperate. I always joke and say I put every gray hair in my mom's head.
Right.
You know. And they would ask me to come with them. You know, and I can't remember, honestly. It's so foggy because there's so much I cannot remember. I can't remember if they had custody of my son at that time, and maybe I can't remember.
Right.
Or if it was right before that. But I would go with them to church.
So you went to church. You made a profession at church. Is that
I
right?
made a profession at church. I don't even know how I got in the altar. I don't know anything because everything's so foggy.
And you got baptized, made a profession, got baptized, but it didn't change you.
Didn't change me. Nope.
Tell us when we was talking before, what you thought on the day you got baptized.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're standing. I'm standing up there. Everybody's coming by to congratulate me, and I remember distinctly thinking, "Well, that didn't work."
Right.
Because I didn't feel any different.
Right.
You know, and I knew I was not going to be able to make this work.
Right.
You know, and I really did want to change. I just didn't know how to change. You know,
So
a big part of me wanted.
Did that
to
even
change.
slow you down?
No, actually, it got worse after that. Everything got worse. And honestly, you know, looking back, and not then, but looking back now, I feel like, you know, that was God getting me ready to really make the change, because I had to be ready to let it go.
Yeah.
You know, and I wasn't.
Right.
I wasn't ready. I wanted him to take all the bad stuff out.
And you keep all the good.
Keep all the good. I don't know if it was good, but
Right.
you know, I was pretty attached to
Right.
using.
Right.
So everything got really, really bad. I went to jail for a while, was evicted from my home, went kind of on the run, absconded from my probation, just I almost like pushing myself so far in the corner that I'd kill myself, basically, you know, despite fear, despite consequence, despite anything. You know, in my mind, I thought hell couldn't be any worse than the way I was living.
Right.
You know, truly, I believe that.
Yeah.
What about that?
Yeah.
So one day the sheriff's office shows up at your door.
No, it's not my door.
Not
Somebody
your
else.
door. Right,
So
somebody
I didn't have a door.
Yeah.
Yeah. They showed up. Yancey County showed up and arrested me on King Branch.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Then take us from there.
Well, like I said, I'd been absconded from probation. I hadn't talked to my parents. It'd probably been, it would have been well over a year going on 2 that we spoke. Because like I said, after I lost my kids, they didn't care. It's not that they didn't care, but they were like, they're done with me. I was no longer the person they knew.
Right.
You know. So they brought me into the jail out here, and I remember they took me at the booking desk or whatever. There's this little room, and I was taken into that room. And I remember being asked, don't you want to call your mom? Because I was the only person not begging to use the telephone there.
Right.
And there were several people brought in. It was a sting operation. Other people were also there. And I did not ask to use the phone at all. And it was Mark Letterman, I don't care to tell you. That's who said, don't you want to call your mom? And I cried one tear, I remember. And I said, I haven't talked to her in about 2 years. I'm not calling her from here.
Right.
So they took me back. And all this time, like that hard heart I'd gotten where I couldn't feel anything, like about a week leading up to that, I'd started crying again. Like thinking about the things that I had done. The Lord was working on me then.
Right.
And I went back and I slept and slept and slept and slept. And when I woke up, he woke me up.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I feel like it's like Lazarus,
Yeah.
Because even though I wasn't really dead, I was pretty dead.
Yeah.
I'd always been, when I was a kid growing up, somebody would cry over commercials, very sensitive.
Right. Right.
And that was my, I didn't want to feel those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I feel them again. But, the Lord just told me. He told me. It's, I remember thinking, I can't face this. I can't deal with this. And he told me he already dealt with it.
Right.
Amen.
Right. So, 2 ladies that came by, you mentioned them when we were talking before we got Anna Scott, Ida Deaton. They have a jail ministry.
They do.
I think they are weekly, right? They're there weekly.
They used to be. I don't know if they both still come in.
Yeah, they're getting pretty old, but just little ladies that care about people.
Yeah.
And they just showed up one day with the gospel.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of that. You were telling us earlier.
Well, when they put me in, I had no desire to hear them. I was tired for one, and two, I had little, if any, faith anyway. But I was pretty hopeless. But after the Lord spoke to my heart when they came back, the next time they brought me a Bible, I asked them to bring me a Bible, and I still carry that Bible.
I have one also with Deaton's name in it. She gave me one at Cassie County.
Amen.
That's a great work.
Yep.
So what year is this?
2011.
So we're clean now. 12,
Since 2011. 11 years.
11 years, yeah. I went to Mount Heritage. Not good with math. So how has life changed? Tell us what God has given you back.
Well, it was like that for me.
Right.
Yeah, I was different.
Yeah.
Part of who I was before, I guess like before, but made better,
right.
and new, new stuff. It's like the Lord wrote the word on my heart.
Yeah.
Before, when I would ever try to read the Bible, I couldn't understand a word of it.
Yeah. But
that was different. Yep.
Yeah.
It's different when He tells you.
Right.
So the Lord began to restore things in your life, restore relationships, restore.
Yep. And let me tell you this story. This is the best right here. Like I said, I hadn't saw my family, Right. And I'm sitting there at visitation. They have visitation on a camera then. Like they did it. You would go out of the cell into the hall and see your family on a camera, right? I remember sitting on the bench. This is after the Lord changed me now. I'm sitting there on the little table. People are having their visits. No, in no way did I think I was having a visit.
Right.
But I remember looking, somebody through that, camera, like out in the lobby, it would show the lobby, seeing my aunt and uncle out there.
Yeah.
And my aunt, she was like Ananias standing out there.
Yeah.
She'd never stepped a foot in a jail in her life.
Right.
And she said, I felt like I was going to be out of the will of the Lord if I did not come.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Lord had already changed me.
Right.
And after that, we talked and everything. It was really good. And I had a message. The jailer come back and said, your mom said to call her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So God started putting it back together before you ever even got out.
Yes. Yes.
He started giving you that relationship again with that family.
Yeah. And then on September 13th, I was took up in front of the Honorable Judge again at the time.
You get no good Judge again, what?
Yep. He's a good man. But he told me, he said, you're going to have something to believe in if you're going to make this work.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know. And when I did, I was ready. I mean, blessed. When they took me up, my family filled the whole pew or whatever, up there. And other people didn't have that.
Right, right.
And after they sentenced me and they didn't send me to prison, I could hear my family shouting and praising the Lord.
Yeah.
When I was back there in the probation section when they were setting up the, what I was going to have to do, which was pretty strict. I mean, honestly, but it was good. I mean, it didn't bother me.
Right.
Tell
us about your probation officer. You had a probation officer. Tell us that.
Well, I had Joey King for okay. Me and Joey go way back.
Yeah.
And then I also had Link Vance, who was a surveillance officer. He worked with me.
Right.
I had Joey, since from 2007 until he changed jobs, basically.
Right.
I cried on him when he told me he was leaving.
Now tell us what was it Link said to you when you got off your probation?
He said of all the people I never thought that would ever live to see the end of their probation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he'd come by. He used to tell us before it started. He'd come by and talk with you about the Lord.
Yep. And let me tell you this too. When I was sentenced in Yancey, I still had charges. I had a hold in Mitchell County to go.
Right.
I go over there. Well, I get to go home. I'm wearing an ankle monitor. I get to go home. I go for court that day. And Link's talked about this too, me grinning when I was just smiling all the time, even though those charges, because I have more charges for selling drugs that would have sent me to prison.
Right.
But they dropped those charges. Yeah. And then when they took me out of the courtroom, Joey said, we think you've learned your lesson. Because it was like from daylight. I mean, it was darkness to daylight. I mean, it's totally different. I was different. And they could tell.
So you went on to school.
Yep. I started at Mayland and I did the Human Services program. And then I transferred over to Lees McRae and I finished that out. I got my bachelor's in Human Services from Lees McRae. And then I went to Milligan and I finished in 2020 with my Master's of Science in Counseling.
Okay. You as well.
I did not go to school.
Okay, but tell us, all right, both of you scoot up here.
Okay.
I want to hear, so we're going to close this podcast out with this thought, and then we're going to make another one if you guys can stick around. We're going to talk about, I'd like to do one just talking about, what to look for parents, how to help, what's a help, what's a hurt, some of those things. If you guys can stick around 30 more minutes, we'll knock that out.
Okay.
But tell us about what you guys do now. Who do you work for and what do you do?
Okay, well, I'm a certified peer support specialist. And I am a certified alcohol and drug counselor as of last Thursday.
Yeah.
I don't go to school. She goes to school.
Right.
She goes to school all the time. She'll go back to school. We don't know. Anytime. Right. So I actually did a training to become a peer support specialist and then worked 3 years to be the certified alcohol and drugs by submitting trainings and things, not going to school. But what I do is I work with people who are either in active substance use and they may not want recovery.
Right.
They may not. but you walk alongside them.
Right.
That's what I do. I walk alongside people. When they need food, we give them food, right? Mm-hmm. We get them food because we've also received food boxes. And I got way off track there, but that's a day-to-day thing that we do. Mm-hmm. Like that's the important part, is being kind to people right where they are.
Right. And so both of you are working with people who have substance abuse issues.
And mental health. They go alongside each other, as we know. So
the Lord has put you guys in a field to serve that you understand very well because you lived in it.
Absolutely. You don't know unless you know.
Right.
You can have compassion and really, sadness and care about people, but unless you've sat there, it's really hard.
Right.
Yeah. Well, people have so much shame when they come. They come in.
Because we're shameful.
So much shame.
We have shameful things we've done.
And it's easier to sit in that space with someone who has been there too.
Right.
Because there's so much shame.
Right. Your story, y'all's stories are so inspiring to me.
Thank you.
Because I've never lived it, but I've seen it. I've got folks that come to my church that have come out of that lifestyle. Honestly, I've got folks that come to my church that still struggle.
Mm-hmm. Good.
I'm glad they're so
good. Yeah. I'm glad they feel welcome here.
And I told one of them last week, I was talking with this person by text, and he's honest with me. He said, I'm struggling right now. Mm-hmm. And I said, we never lose till you quit fighting.
Mm-hmm.
I said, you got to keep getting up and fighting.
Mm-hmm.
But your story is so inspiring to see what the Lord has done in your lives, and that there's hope.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people are going to see the title of this podcast and tune into it that feel hopeless on one side of it or the other. Either the mom feels hopeless that the kid's never coming out of it, or the addict feels hopeless that they can never get out of it. Mm-hmm. And you guys are a beacon of hope. If the Lord did it for y'all, He can do it for whoever's watching.
That's very real.
And He did it for Todd. And so the Lord's able.
Yep.
The Lord's able. There are success stories out there. Now, next week's podcast, which is going to be in the next few minutes for us, but it'll be next week for those that are watching, we're going to talk about what needs to happen. What can parents do that'll be a help instead of a hurt? What resources can the addict reach out to if they're really interested in getting off of drugs? We're going to talk about some of those things in the next podcast. But I want you guys to know I so appreciate you coming and sitting down and talking to us about this. I'm glad that you feel like you can share your story. A lot of people might say, well, I'm embarrassed to tell that. But you guys, I just feel like it's ringing home for a lot of people.
No. We were saved for a day such as this.
Yeah. I'm the demoniac. What are you talking about?
I had a pastor stand up and say once when I was in church, he said, who am I not to tell what the Lord has done in my life? Right. And every time I get nervous or every time I stand up or somebody asks me, like Shane, he's always dragging me to do whatever. Yeah. But who am I to not tell what the Lord's done?
Yeah.
Right. That's awesome. Any closing words before we start?
Well, I just love hearing stories about the grace of God.
Amen.
Because really, we talked about this earlier. The sad reality is the majority never come out.
Yeah.
Majority never come out. But I'm glad God's able to deliver, no matter how deep, no matter how bad, no matter how wretched.
Yep.
I'm glad God is able to reach further down than we can reach up.
Yep.
And deliver us from so great a death. And I'm thankful for that.
All right, you're going to want to tune in next week because we're going to be back with these same ladies, and we're going to talk about ideas of what we can do going forward. Thank you for watching. Until next time, strength for things that remain.